Arthur Davies bought the house in the autumn of 2023. It was an old Victorian structure built in 1888, located on a quiet street in a small New England town. The house had good bones, as the real estate agent had said. The floors were solid. The walls were thick. But the house was also filled with the remnants of previous lives. There were layers of wallpaper in the hallways. There were old fixtures in the bathrooms. There were stains on the ceilings that suggested decades of minor leaks and repairs. Arthur knew the house would require work, but he liked the character. He liked the history. He decided to start with the attic. The attic was exactly what one might expect. It was dusty. It was dark. It smelled of old wood and forgotten things. There were boxes of holiday decorations left behind by the previous owner. There were stacks of old newspapers, yellowed and brittle. There were pieces of broken furniture that had been deemed too damaged to move, but too sentimental to throw away. Arthur spent several weekends sorting through the debris, deciding what to keep and what to discard. It was during the third weekend that he noticed something unusual. In the far corner of the attic, beneath a layer of cobwebs and dust, there was a loose floorboard. Arthur had not noticed it before because it was partially hidden by a stack of cardboard boxes. When he moved the boxes, he saw that the floorboard was slightly raised, as if something beneath it was pushing it up. He pried the board loose with a screwdriver. Beneath the floorboard, there was a small cavity in the attic floor. Inside the cavity, there was a wooden box. The box was not large. It was perhaps 6 inches long, 4 inches wide, and 3 inches deep. It was made of plain pine, with no decoration or carving. There was no lock. The lid was simply fitted onto the base. Arthur lifted the box out of the cavity and set it on the attic floor. He opened it. Inside, there was only one item. It was a single piece of paper, folded into quarters. The paper was brittle and yellowed with age. Arthur unfolded it carefully, worried that it might tear. The paper was a drawing. It had been made with pencil and wax crayon. The lines were simple but precise. The colors were faded but still visible. The drawing depicted a room. There was a fireplace on one wall with a mantelpiece and a decorative surround. There was a rocking chair near the fireplace. There were 2 windows on the adjacent wall, with a specific style of wooden frame. There was a pattern on the walls that suggested floral wallpaper. In the corner of the drawing, written in a child's careful handwriting, was a date. It read 1901. Arthur studied the drawing for several minutes. There was something familiar about it. The layout of the room, the proportions, the placement of the windows. He realized with a sudden jolt of recognition that the drawing depicted the living room on the first floor of his house. But that made no sense. The current living room had no fireplace. The windows were modern, double-hung vinyl replacements. The walls were painted a neutral beige. There was no wallpaper. The room in the drawing was not the room that existed now. Arthur carried the drawing downstairs. He stood in the living room and held the drawing up, trying to match the perspective. The angle was correct. The proportions were correct. The drawing showed a fireplace on the wall that was now blank, the wall between the living room and the dining room. Arthur walked over to the wall and pressed his hand against it. It was solid plaster. There was no indication that a fireplace had ever been there. But the drawing was so precise, so detailed. It did not look like a child's imagination. It looked like a careful observation of a real place. Arthur decided to investigate. He was not a historian, but he knew that old houses often had hidden histories. He contacted the local historical society. The society put him in touch with Dr. Evelyn Reed, a local historian who specialized in residential architecture and family genealogy in the region. Dr. C. Henner Reed agreed to meet Arthur at the house the following week. Dr. Reed arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. She was a woman in her mid-50s, with graying hair and a calm, methodical demeanor. Arthur showed her the drawing and explained where he had found it. Dr. Reed examined the drawing closely. She noted the paper type, the style of the crayon, and the handwriting. She took several photographs. She asked Arthur if she could borrow the drawing for a few days to conduct further research. Arthur agreed. 3 days later, Dr. Reed called Arthur. She had news. The drawing was authentic. The paper was consistent with the type used in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The crayon medium was typical of children's art supplies from that era. The handwriting style matched educational standards taught in schools around 1900. The date, 1901, was almost certainly accurate. Dr. Reed had also conducted a title search on the house. The records showed that the house had been built in 1888 by a local carpenter. The first family to live in the house had moved in that same year. Dr. Reed had found census records and city directories from the period. In 1901, the house was occupied by a family named Bishop. The head of the household was Thomas Bishop, a merchant who ran a dry goods store in the town center. His wife was Clara Bishop. They had one child, a son named Samuel Bishop, who was 7 years old in 1901. Dr. Reed believed that the drawing had been made by Samuel. The style and skill level were consistent with a child of that age. Arthur was fascinated, but the question remained. Why did the drawing show a fireplace that no longer existed? Dr. Reed suggested that they bring in an architectural historian to examine the house. She recommended Professor Kenji Tanaka, an expert in Victorian-era construction and renovation. Professor Tanaka agreed to visit the house the following weekend. Professor Tanaka was a man in his early 60s, with a precise manner and a deep knowledge of building techniques. He arrived at the house on a Saturday morning. Arthur and Dr. Reed showed him the drawing and explained the mystery. Professor Tanaka studied the drawing, then walked into the living room. He examined the blank wall carefully. He tapped the plaster with his knuckles. The sound was hollow. He asked Arthur if he could make a small exploratory hole in the wall. Arthur agreed. Professor Tanaka used a utility knife to cut a small square in the plaster, about 6 inches on each side. He pulled away the plaster and the layer of drywall behind it. Behind the drywall there was brick. The brick was old, dark red, and laid in a pattern consistent with fireplace construction. Professor Tanaka used a flashlight to peer into the cavity. He nodded. There was a chimney flue, capped at some point in the past. The fireplace had been sealed and covered over, but it was still there, exactly where the drawing showed it. Arthur was stunned. The drawing was not a fantasy. It was a precise record of the room as it had existed in 1901. Professor Tanaka explained that it was common for fireplaces to be sealed during mid-20th century renovations. Homeowners wanted to modernize. They wanted central heating. Fireplaces were seen as old-fashioned, inefficient, and sometimes dangerous. The fireplace in Arthur's house had likely been sealed sometime in the 1950s or 1960s. Dr. Reed decided to search for the original blueprints of the house. She and Professor Tanaka visited the town hall and the county archives. After several hours of searching, they found the original architectural drawings, dated 1888. The blueprints confirmed everything. The fireplace was there in the exact location shown in Samuel's drawing. The windows matched. Even the dimensions of the room matched. Samuel had drawn the room with remarkable accuracy. The mystery of the drawing's accuracy was solved. But new questions emerged. Why had the room been changed so drastically? What had happened to the Bishop family? And why had the drawing been hidden in the attic, sealed beneath a floorboard? Dr. Reed continued her research. She searched through newspaper archives, census records, and vital statistics. She discovered that Thomas and Clara Bishop had lived in the house for many years. But in 1902, just 1 year after the drawing was likely made, Samuel Bishop had died. The death certificate was vague. It listed the cause of death as complications from a domestic accident. There were no newspaper articles about the death, no obituaries. The event had been kept private, as was often the case with family tragedies in that era. Dr. Reed found more records. The Bishop family continued to live in the house for decades after Samuel's death. They lived there through the 1910s, the 1920s, the 1930s, and into the 1940s. Thomas Bishop died in 1943. Clara Bishop lived in the house alone until 1954. In that year, she sold the house to a man named Walter Fleming. Clara moved to a smaller residence and died 2 years later in 1956. Property records showed that Walter Fleming began a major renovation of the house immediately after purchasing it. The work was extensive. The fireplace was sealed. The wallpaper was stripped. The windows were replaced. The renovations were completed in 1955. This explained why the room no longer resembled the drawing, but it did not explain why the drawing had been hidden. Dr. Reed suspected that there might be personal documents that could shed light on the story. She contacted the county archive, which held collections donated by prominent local families. She spoke with Maria Gonzalez, the head archivist. Maria remembered that the Bishop family estate had donated several boxes of papers in the 1970s. The boxes had never been fully cataloged. Dr. E. Reed and Maria spent an afternoon searching through the collection. In the third box, tucked inside an old ledger, they found a stack of personal letters and a small leather-bound journal. The journal had belonged to Clara Bishop. The entries were written in faded ink in a neat, flowing hand. Dr. Reed carefully turned the pages. The entries from 1901 and 1902 were particularly detailed. The journal painted a picture of Samuel's life. Clara described him as a quiet child, thoughtful and artistic. He loved to draw. He spent hours sitting in the living room, especially during the cold winter months. The living room was his favorite place. He would sit in the rocking chair near the fireplace with a pad of paper and his crayons and draw what he saw around him. Clara wrote that Samuel made many drawings of the room. She kept some of them, treasuring them as evidence of her son's careful eye and gentle nature. The journal entry from February 1902 was difficult to read. Clara's handwriting became shaky, the words blotted in places as if tears had fallen on the page. She described a day in late winter. Samuel had been sitting near the fireplace as he often did. The fire was burning low. A log shifted suddenly. A spark flew past the old fire screen. It landed on Samuel's clothing. His shirt caught fire. Clara rushed to him. She tried to smother the flames with a blanket. But Samuel had already been badly burned. A doctor was called. Samuel lived for 3 days, in terrible pain. Then he died. Clara wrote that she and Thomas could not bear to use the fireplace after that day. They never lit another fire in it. They could not bring themselves to change the room, because it had been Samuel's favorite place, but they also could not bear to look at it. The room became a place of profound sadness. Clara wrote that she gathered Samuel's drawings and placed them in a small wooden box. She hid the box in the attic beneath a loose floorboard. It was her way of preserving his memory while also putting it to rest. The journal entries after 1902 were sparse. Clara wrote less frequently. She mentioned Thomas less often. There was a sense of quiet grief that never fully faded. The later entries from the 1940s and 1950s mentioned the decision to sell the house. Clara wrote that she could not live there any longer. The house held too many memories. She sold it to Walter Fleming, who had plans to modernize it. Clara did not object. She wanted the house to have a new life. Dr. Reed shared the journal entries with Arthur. The mystery was solved. The drawing was not a mystery of the supernatural or the unexplained. It was a record of a child's careful observation, a testament to Samuel's love of his home. The box had been hidden by a grieving mother, placed beneath the floorboard as a private memorial. The drawing survived by chance, preserved in the dry, dark space of the attic for over a century. The 1955 renovation by Walter Fleming had not been an act of erasure. It had been a practical decision. The fireplace was old, dangerous, and no longer functional. The windows were drafty. The wallpaper was outdated. Fleming had simply modernized the house, as many homeowners did in the post-war era. He had no knowledge of the tragedy that had occurred there. The story had faded from public memory. Arthur decided to preserve the drawing. He had it framed in archival glass with UV protection to prevent further fading. He hung it in the living room, on the wall where the fireplace once stood. He also contacted a local contractor to discuss the possibility of opening the wall and restoring the fireplace. He did not intend to use it. He wanted to restore the room to its 1901 appearance, as a memorial to Samuel. Professor Tanaka assisted with the restoration. They removed the drywall and plaster carefully. The brickwork of the fireplace was intact. The mantelpiece had been removed, but Professor Tanaka found a photograph of a similar mantelpiece in a local architectural archive. A craftsman was hired to recreate it. The windows were more difficult. The original wooden frames had been replaced in the 1950s. But Professor Tanaka located a salvage yard that had period-appropriate windows from a house of the same era. They were installed carefully. Dr. Reed helped Arthur research the wallpaper. She found a fragment of the original wallpaper in the Bishop family papers. It was a floral pattern, with roses and leaves on a cream background. A specialty company was able to reproduce the pattern. Arthur had the wallpaper installed on one wall of the living room, the wall visible in Samuel's drawing. The rocking chair was more difficult to find. Arthur searched antique shops and estate sales. Eventually, he found a chair that matched the style shown in the drawing. It was not the original chair, but it was close. The restoration took several months. When it was complete, Arthur invited Dr. Reed, Professor Tanaka, and Maria Gonzalez to see the room. They stood in the living room, looking at the restored fireplace, the wallpaper, the windows, and the rocking chair. Dr. Reed held Samuel's drawing. The match was nearly perfect. Samuel had drawn the room with extraordinary accuracy. His drawing was not just a piece of art, it was a historical document, a window into a world that had been hidden for decades. Arthur reflected on the experience. He had bought the house expecting to find old pipes and creaky floors. Instead, he had uncovered a story. He had found a family, a tragedy, and a small boy's careful record of the place he loved. The drawing was now more than a mystery. It was a connection to the past, a reminder that houses are not just structures of wood and brick. They are containers of lives, of memories, of moments both joyful and tragic. The drawing remains in the living room, framed and protected. Visitors to the house often ask about it. Arthur tells them the story of Samuel Bishop, of the drawing found beneath the floorboard, and of the room restored to its 1901 appearance. He tells them about Clara's journal, about the fire, and about the decision to hide the drawing as a private memorial. He tells them that the drawing survived by chance, a small miracle of preservation. The story of Samuel's drawing spread through the town. The local newspaper wrote an article about it. The Historical Society added the story to their records. Maria Gonzalez cataloged the Bishop family papers, making them available to researchers. Dr. Reed published a short paper about the case, using it as an example of how domestic artifacts can illuminate hidden histories. Arthur continues to live in the house. He has made other renovations, updating the kitchen and bathrooms, repairing the roof, and refinishing the floors. But the living room remains as it was in 1901. It is a memorial, a tribute to a child who loved to draw and a mother who loved her son. The fireplace is not used. It is simply there, a reminder of the past. Every old house holds stories. Some are easy to find, recorded in deeds and blueprints. Others are hidden, tucked away in attics and sealed behind walls. Samuel's drawing was one of those hidden stories. It survived because Clara wanted to preserve it. It was found because Arthur was curious. It was understood because historians like Dr. Reed, Professor Tanaka, and Maria Gonzalez cared enough to search for the truth. The drawing is a perfect time capsule. It shows a room that existed for only a brief moment in history, before tragedy changed it forever. It shows the careful observation of a 7-year-old boy who did not know that his drawing would outlive him by more than a century. It shows the love of a mother who could not bear to destroy her son's work, even as she could not bear to look at it. The drawing is a reminder that every object, every piece of paper, every loose floorboard might hold a piece of a forgotten life, waiting to be discovered.